as Jessica demonstrates to us 3 very yummy recipes related to tea. If you have questions, please go ahead and post them in the Q&A and we'll try to get to them as much as possible. I wanted to first acknowledge my Zoom background. This is actually taken by an MA student who finished his degree in Asian American Studies at UCI, Guni Abasakara. He took a picture of the Hendrix Tea Company, which was founded in 1943 in Ceylon. And the company's granddaughter is an UCI alum, Denali Malikagi, and she founded the US-based Hendrix Tea House, and they worked together to create a series of promotional materials. So I wanted to acknowledge their creativity and their entrepreneurial spirit. I also want to thank our co-sponsors for Lisa C's visit. I encourage you to come to the 5 o'clock conversation talk by her. She'll be speaking with Professor Yong Chen about her book, The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane. Also, I want to mention that I'm so grateful for UCI Illuminations for bringing such rich opportunities to us, as well as the Anteater Recreational Center and the support of the UCI media. This event is part of Asian Tea Week that is being co-sponsored by the UCI Humanities Center, the Center for Asian Studies, and the Jordan Center for Persian Studies. We had a wonderful conversation on Monday about boba tea, and if you're interested in taking a look at that, we have a video on our Facebook page and our website. We also have video programs that talk about Persian tea, Chinese tea, Japanese tea. And if you're interested, please come tomorrow at noon. We're just gonna put the kettle on and chat with each other. So bring your tea and your lunch. Before I begin, I particularly want to acknowledge UCI Libraries and Richard Cho. He wrote a review of Lisa C's most recent novel, The Island of Sea Women, and he also created a library resource about her writings. And I want to thank as well Academic Professional Women of UCI and Asian American Pacific Islander Women Leadership for co-promoting this event. So thank you so much for your patience with that. I'm so honored to be in conversation with Lisa C. When I started my dissertation many decades ago, I read her book on Los Angeles Chinatown called On Gold Mountain, The 100-Year Odyssey of My Chinese American Family. Since then, Lisa has written a number of works that have become best-selling novels, including a trio of mysteries and 7 historical fiction novels, most of them set in China and the most really recent one in Korea, but also in the United States, exploring the Asian American experience. In each of Lisa's works, she's conducted a detailed historical and ethnographic research to capture the accuracy of particular time periods and locations. And at the same time, she really brings these characters to life, helping us as readers to identify with the hopes and the fears of these characters, their sense of betrayal and commitment and friendship. So I'd like to encourage Lisa to come on the screen with me. And I wanted to first explore with you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, and welcome to everyone.
I know that your mother is a writer, Carolyn C. is a writer, and that your father, Richard C., was an anthropologist. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how that particular background might have shaped the way you approach research and writing.
Yeah, I mean, I really do feel like I'm a true blending of my parents. Like you said, my father was an anthropologist, and you know, the anthropologists do look at the world in a particular kind of way and how people live and where people live, and just, you know, sort of the material anthropology, which is something that I have loved about, especially writing the historical novels, because I get to go to all the places that I write about, and I try to look at life, you know, at all levels. What do people eat? What are they drinking? What are they wearing? What are the traditions around childbirth? What are the traditions around weddings and funerals and all of those kinds of things? And then my mother was a writer. And in fact, her father was a writer as well. And so I'm a 3rd generation writer. My mother and I wrote, I mean, my mother passed away a few years ago, but we wrote very different kinds of books. But my approach to writing definitely comes from her, and my work habits definitely come from her, and those come from her father. My mother's papers are at UCLA, and actually when I was working on Gold Mountain, the book that you mentioned, I found in her papers, and I was doing research, on how my parents met and everything. I found a letter that her father had written to her when she was in college saying, if you want to be a writer, you have to write 1,000 words a day. And of course, that's what my mother always said to me as well. So 1,000 words, it's just 4 pages, but you do that every day, you're going to end up with a book somewhere along the line.
That advice makes a lot of sense because you're such a prolific writer, such a rich array of works. I'm going to be presumptuous and read something that you wrote. I did ask Lisa if she wanted to read instead, but she said go ahead. I wanted to read this passage from On Gold Mountain because I think it captures such rich themes that I think really run through the rest of your writings as well. So this is from the foreword. As a girl, I spent frequent weekends and most of my summer vacations with my paternal grandparents in Chinatown. We would pass through a moon gate guarded by 2 huge stone lions and enter the dark, cool recesses of our family's Chinese antique store. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. At lunchtime, Grandma Stella and I would walk up the street to a restaurant that we must have had a real name, but that we just called the Little Place. Along the way, we stopped to chat with Blackie at the Sam Sing butcher shop with its gold leaf roast pig in the window. We stopped in at Margaret's International Grocery and browsed through the aisles with their salted plums, dried squid, and fermented tofu. At the restaurant, we go back to the kitchen to chat with the cook and watch as he packed up our order in cartons. My grandmother taught me how to wash the rice until the water ran clear. Then, without the aid of a measuring cup, pour water over the grains in the steamer up to the first knuckle of a hand. It didn't matter if it was her knuckle or mine, she explained. For 5,000 years, the system had worked perfectly. Finally, she would place a few lengths of lapchung, a delicious pork sausage, on top to cook as the rice steamed. Meanwhile, my grandfather would be chopping ingredients. Once the rice was on, I became my grandfather's second cook. The best I ever had, he used to say. Together, although all these years later, I can't remember a single thing I did, we could make up a dish of tomato beef for which he was remembered decades after his death. So I wondered if you could reflect a little bit about this passage.
I think don't know, it's making me want to cry. And it's making me want to eat. I actually have my grandfather's tomato beef recipe on my website somewhere. I don't know where it is on there, but I know it's on there someplace. And, he had a restaurant in the 1930s. It was called Dragon's Den. It was I think they called it like the 7th family style Chinese restaurant in Los Angeles. And food was so much a part of our family. But, I think it's a part of every family, no matter what your background. But certainly for the Chinese, it's front and center. And those things that you were talking about, there's such home cooked kind of meals, putting the lapchang on the rice and tomato beef. While it is a traditional Chinese dish, it also has that kind of American Chinese feel to it. You don't really see it on menus much anymore. It was sort of that, I sort of think of like 1930s, 40s, 1950s Chinese, American style Chinese restaurant. And every once in a while, I know my cousin and I sort of long for that kind of food that you just don't see anymore.
I just love the memory that you shared with us now and also that you wrote about. For me, one of the themes that really crosses your books is about a sense of generation and time, that you follow certain characters, but you're also interested in their family and their family, this kind of communication across generations. And I also love that passage of, people have been cooking rice for 5,000 years and you get to learn this wisdom in the kitchen. To connect with your grandparents. It's just so beautiful.
Yeah, and just weirdly enough, last night I made a soup where it had rice in it, and the recipe said, don't wash the rice. And I was like, well, okay. And then it just came out very goopy. I don't know, I didn't like it at all. But next time, if I ever make that, it was not a Chinese dish, but it was like, I'm so used to washing rice that it's just weird when even to see that in a recipe telling you not to, it was just odd.
Well, this seems like a great time to bring in Jessica Von Roo. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us. I know you've identified 3 wonderful recipes to share with us. And I was wondering if you could also introduce yourself and your connection, especially with Chinese and perhaps Taiwanese cooking.
Oh, but you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry.
I wish I had controls. I don't have, oh, not yet. Good?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, now I'm good. I have no control over that. Sorry, everyone. So yes, I grew up in Taiwan. So I've actually gone through banquet training in Taiwan through a school called Weichun. I speak Mandarin fluently, and I cooked with tea growing up a lot. We had tea at every meal. It's something that I grew up having all the time. So today what I wanted to do is show 3 recipes that use tea, one of them being the most traditional way that I grew up using tea in food, and they're tea eggs. So it's something that when you walk around any kind of convenience store in Taiwan, you would find it inside the 7-Eleven in a cooker, almost like a warmer, and it would have tea bags inside of it, and there'd just be these eggs that have been stewing for hours. And so I'll show you how to make that. But yeah, that's my little connection with tea and growing up in Taiwan.
Do you want to go ahead with the tea egg
Yes.
recipe?
So I'm gonna show you quickly, though, not quickly, but I wanted to show everyone how to prepare tea too. So we're gonna do that first, and this is Kung Fu style, Gong Fu. I speak Mandarin fluently, so it's hard sometimes when you're trying to speak the American version versus the Mandarin version, but Gong Fu Cha is something that you find all over, and it's an actual technique of making tea. There's this vessel, which is a gai wan, and gai means to cover. So it's a bowl.
Hold one up here too, closer.
And she has one too, so it's a gai wan. So you can cover it up. And what you can do is you can put the tea leaves in here, and then the idea is that the lid of the cup will help kind of prevent the tea leaves from going into the cups when you serve it. So you can use that, or you can use a teapot. So those are the 2 that you're gonna brew the tea in. There's little filters that you can use, and you can pour the tea into the filter, and then you would take this to share the tea amongst all these little bowls. The main thing about making this is heating everything up. So we're going to be talking about pu'er tea in a little bit, but this is loose pu'er. This is that I was able to buy. Some people will put it in and then add the hot water. You can add just the hot water to clean the bowl first, but I'm not actually brewing this right away. What I'm actually doing is I'm heating up the pot. I guess I am brewing it to an extent, but I'm going to use this water to clean all and warm up all these little bowls. The reason why you use this tray, I'm not going to use this. I just did that just to show you. The reason why you use this tray is because underneath there's a little bit of room so that the excess water can fall down onto the bottom of that. So as that is brewing, I'm going to take some of that hot water and rinse these cups out. Usually you would do this with tongs because it gets very hot. So you can go ahead and rinse them out, and then they'll get hot. And some people will even take this and pour it on top of the teacup. Just like that. And now you can pour out the rest of the tea into the bottom, or you can just pour it all over and reheat. Because I'm actually blooming the tea. So I'm starting to heat up the tea. And there's different ways. The Japanese will do it in a different way, and different people will do it different ways. And so there's the tea in there. I'm going to add more water and let it brew now. And it depends. So it's about 5 grams for 150 milliliters. So about a tablespoon, a little bit more than a tablespoon for about half a cup, a little over half a cup. And I would normally let this brew for a little bit longer. For tea brewing, the trick is 5 seconds. If you feel like your tea is too weak, wait another 5 seconds and then every time you brew tea, add 5 seconds if you feel like it's not strong enough. So I have this little strainer here to pick up any of the extra tea leaves that might fall through.
Jessica, there's a particular question about pu'er tea. How long should one keep pu'er tea? I'm not sure if it's keep or steep. Does it need to be kept in a certain manner?
So the main thing about it, I find, is that, and I'll show you in a little bit, steeping it, I would start with maybe 30 seconds if you're doing a couple washes. It just depends on how you like it, how strong you like it towards the end. I'm going to read the question and then I'll get to it in 1 second. Ooh, decaffeinated tea. Huh? Sure. All right. And then for this one, if you wanted to see how you would normally do it, you would pick it up on one side and then you can pour it out just like that. And then you've got your tea ready to go. And then you would drink it and then continue. And this is a portable set, so you could actually take that wherever you're going. So let's talk about pu'er really quick. This is what it comes in. I don't know how many people have actually seen pu'er tea. This is loose leaf tea.
I have a question about that.
Yes.
So pu'er tea is featured in the tea girl of Hummingbird Lane. Just briefly say what pu'er tea is, because not everyone here might.
So pu'er tea is fermented. And so what it means is...
Well, actually, it's not necessarily fermented.
Go for it, yes.
Don't mind me jumping in here.
No, please, that's the whole point.
The thing about pu'er is that it does age. And so there's the naturally aged pu'er that can just, they process the leaves, they make the tea cake. The tea cake can be as small as the one that you're seeing on the screen now. They can also be this big, but the typical size is about like this, maybe a little bit, sometimes about this size, sometimes about the size of a Frisbee. And those can be stacked and then stored. This is, why they were compressed like this was when they used to travel overland, 1,000 miles in every direction to be sold. And so as they were traveling like that, they were aging. And, if, let's say, it went to Tibet, where they were traded these tea cakes for war horses. That's how valuable this tea was. And it took, carrying it 1,000 years ago, it took anywhere from 6 months to 2 years walking overland. And while people were walking, they were walking through rain and snow and humidity and heat. And so by the time they got to Tibet, the nature of the tea had actually changed. And so this tea is still really at the heart of the Tibetan diet. People drink up to like 20, 30 cups a day, but it's made with yak milk. And so this is the main basis of the Tibetan diet. But another direction it went was out towards Hong Kong and Guangzhou. Again, hot, very humid. And you all know, dim sum is really from that area of China, and dim sum can be quite greasy. So restaurants would buy large quantities of tea cakes and put them down in their basements. And again, they were sitting down there a long time and they started to age. And as they aged, they changed their nature. And so people would go to different restaurants in Hong Kong and Guangzhou, not for the quality of the dim sum, but for the quality of the tea that came out of that particular basement, because every basement was a little different. Now, you're right, Jessica, that there is a kind of artificial fermentation process that was developed in the 1970s. And so today we can buy the raw pu'er, which is just, it's only been processed. You could drink it at 3 days old, but you can let that sit on your shelf for years and it will naturally age and change its nature. Or you can buy the ripe pu'er, which has been artificially aged. And the way they do that is they have these huge, piles of tea, and they put water and stuff like that, and then they cover it with burlap. And it's kind of like having a compost heap, right? It's fermenting and changing under there, changing its nature. So again, you have different ways that you can drink the pu'er.
And it's funny when you order it, you get the choice of ordering it either raw or ripe. And so the main thing, I think a lot of people when they buy this might not realize it's a cake and it's not the easiest to work with. And so they'll look at it and be like, okay, well, what do I do with this thing? Letter openers work really well. Or if you have do you have one of the knives? Do you have a knife? You do.
Brought mine out too.
You brought your knife. Cool.
I could just earlier. I saw people can't see. Oh, this is a very fancy one. This is my fancy one. But you can see it is sort of like a letter opener or a ice pick.
Yep, that would work. Yeah.
But people can see it, I think.
So I just use a dull knife, and then you can, or a sharp knife, either one, but just make about 2 or 3 around the edges, and the cake will slowly start to fall apart, and it should come right out the middle. And so I just wanted to show you, you can buy them large like this. This came actually in a tube like this. So they're little tea cakes, and you can go around and then you just break it apart. So that was this is probably the part that's most interesting, is that it's so packed together that there's actually quite a lot of tea leaves in that little amount. So I am going to show you tea leaf eggs. So I have hard boiled eggs here. So if you're just gonna boil eggs, I like to do a soft boil for this. It's up to you how you wanna boil your eggs. Traditionally, the eggs are cooked so long that it's almost got a sulfuric smell to it. And people kind of freak out when they first see it. But what goes inside of it are these ingredients. And so there's cinnamon, fennel seeds, bay leaves, star anise, and I use Sichuan peppercorn. If you can't find Sichuan peppercorn, I like it because it gives it an extra kind of flavor. You can just use regular peppercorns. Or if you don't want to go through all of this, you just need to buy one of these bags. So this is a spice bag, and you can buy them at 99 Ranch, most Asian markets, and they come inside another little plastic bag, and there's these pouches, and they have all the spices in there, including fennel, cinnamon. There's a little bit of cumin in here as well. So if you're doing this, you would put this all into a cheesecloth, or if you have a bag, put it in the bag. It's okay if you don't, though, especially if you're doing this for home. I've got a little bit of sugar in there as well, and then soy sauce. And then I'm just going to cover this with water. And I'll bring it up to a boil. And then I'm going to put my eggs in there, and I keep my eggs in there for 1 hour. And then I turn it off. So I slowly cook it. And so I've been cooking these since yesterday. So if you look, the outside of the egg is almost this brown color. These were brown eggs, sorry, I cheated. And they are though. But what I want to show you is the effect of the tea, the soy sauce, and all of that on this egg. And this is something that kids grew up eating. My husband's from Shanghai. His mom makes this all the time. The funny thing about this is the best tasting tea eggs are warm, but you have to be able to peel a hot or warm egg, which isn't always easy. So there you go. And then it's got this cool marbled effect from just sitting in that liquid. And it's also from the tea. So I have in here, I have the pouch of spices, and then I have the tea bags ready to go too. And then if you cut through here, you'll see that the skin, it's starting to pick up a lot of that color. It's turning a little bit more brown, but the egg yolk also turns color. So that's a tea egg.
Thank you so much, Jessica.
No problem.
Talking about...
I want to come over and have it right now. I might have to make some this evening.
I was thinking about our earlier conversation about food and generations, and my older son just loves eggs, and especially the soy sauce eggs. And then for my parents, they would always have a hot kettle of water going. And that's just part of, I think, a Chinese American family. They always have hot water on hand to make tea. I was going to read this passage a little bit later, but since we're talking about pu'er, I wanted to read a passage about the novel that will be discussed later on today at 5 o'clock. So this is about a young woman learning about the heritage of tea and the caretaking of tea. And it repeats a little bit of what Lisa was saying earlier. Amma stares down at me and shakes her head tolerantly. Just sit, just listen. Then she begins, you've heard the stories of how the tea horse road spread civilization through the trade of salt, matches, and so many other necessities. None was more important than exchange of our tea for Tibet's war horses. Each caravan might take 6 months to reach its destination, she continues. One part was so steep, it took 20 days to go 225 kilometers, with rests every 100 meters or so. Many died from the hardship, falling from cliffs or freezing in blizzards. But those who survived to come home would turn around after a few days and start the trip all over again, back and forth, never ending. Now, girl, think of your female ancestors 30 generations back, walking all that way. As they traveled, they picked up wanted and unwanted guests on their bodies and in their belongings, pollens, seeds, and spores. Now look at the mother tree, the mother tea tree. It's as gnarled and twisted as ever. The trunk and branches are still infested with the various types of fungi, molds, orchids, and of course the yellow threads. All the life on the mother tree came from somewhere else. It was transported by our nomadic ancestors. You can see the tree shows the history of our female line. Lisa, would you like to comment?
I would, and I want to make 2 comments. So if I forget later, will you remind me about leaves? There's just the leaves of pu'er. So the other thing about pu'er that we didn't mention is that it grows very differently than the way we think of most tea. So most people, when they think of tea plants, they think of those low shrubs. Maybe you've seen them in person, maybe you've seen them just in photographs, often on these terraces, and they're low and they're wide so that people can just sort of walk by and pick the leaves off the top. So it's very convenient. Every single tea shrub in the world is a clone. So they're all clones. This means that they have to be taken, somebody has to take care of them. They've been manicured and cloned into that shape. And again, this doesn't matter if you are in China or India or Japan or Kenya is now a big tea growing place. And now Hawaii is starting to grow tea, and also I think Oregon. So again, it doesn't matter where, they're all clones. And because they're clones, people need to take care of them. So they need to be fertilized, they need to be watered, they need to be sprayed for insects, all of that, this kind of man-made, and the leaf itself doesn't vary from plant to plant. How you get the different types of tea is how it's processed. So you'll end up with English breakfast tea or lapsang souchong or jasmine tea or you name it. It's come from that basic plant, and it's just how it's processed. But here's the difference with pu'er. Pu'er comes from the original tea trees. So before they were cloned, these were trees that grew from individual seeds. So each tree is individual. It has its own genetic makeup. And they've been growing by themselves in the jungle, and technically for a tea to be a true pu'er, it has to come from a tea tree that's 200 or more years old. So in Yunnan province, you see trees 200, 400, 800, 1,000 years old. I have a tea that's made from the leaves of one single 1,000-year-old tree. So, for 2 weeks, 1 year, they will just pick only the leaves from that tree to make this tea. There's a tree in China, 3,400 years old, that they know was cultivated for tea. So this is something that's been going on a long time. Now, the thing is about these trees, nobody was taking care of them. They had to survive on their own. Nobody was coming and fertilizing them. No one was coming and spraying them. And so they do have a lot of insects and parasites. One of them, I think, is called red crab spider, something like that. That, if that grows on that particular tree, it's going to have an effect on the taste. So the taste is unique because of the tree. And then the other thing is because they've had to survive on their own. Well, two things. One is that they have their root systems, and their roots go out and they pick up flavors from the plants and other trees that are around them. So if there's like a camphor tree nearby, you'll have little flavor of camphor in that particular tea. But you could also be growing next to something that's poisonous, so it could actually make you kind of sick to your stomach. So that's one thing. But the other is because they've been surviving on their own, these old tea trees have phenols and also other enzymes and things like that in them that are what keep them alive, you know, that have protected them. And it turns out that a lot of those chemical properties of these old tea trees also have an effect on us. And that's why these, you know, the pu'er is so, one of the reasons why it's so valuable, the flavor, but also the fact that it does have these really good medicinal properties to it as well. I mean, we know all tea is good for you, right? That's the given, but this is even better for you.
Thank you
So
much.
you wanted me to comment on, I'm sorry, I just had to get that off my chest.
No, that is so
because,
fascinating.
But you had asked, oh, well, I think I sort of was covering that idea of people going back and forth. And, you know, this is how plants and animals move from place to place, right? This isn't anything new. And so when I was writing The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane, and I sort of envisioned this hidden grove with the mother tree and the sort of sister trees around it, that it would have these extra special medicinal qualities that nobody would really know what they were, but that they would have been things that could have been picked up on your clothing, could have been in the things that you were carrying that were brought here, or brought to the hidden grove. And of course, I really want to emphasize this does continue to today. You know, we are getting new parasites and different kinds of infestations, particularly in our trees. You know, here in Southern California, but really all of California, there's something called the Polyphagus shot hole borer that came from Vietnam about 5 years ago, and it's already killed 1 million trees in Los Angeles alone. So, you know, and it doesn't have what do you call it, an enemy here, you know, because it just doesn't. So this has been pretty devastating to the trees here in California.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
I'm sorry the phone was ringing. I actually unplugged the phone, but I didn't unplug the one over there. I'm sorry.
I was really struck by the theme of indigeneity and rootedness, like these trees that have been going for thousands of years, but that it's not in opposition to the sense of travel, of species exchange, that it enriches what is there. One of the interesting pairings that I think about this book is that it's about an ethnic minority that's in southeastern China, but it's also about transnational adoption. And so it seems like the theme of rootedness and travel, diaspora are connected in your book. And I was wondering if you wanted to say a little bit more about what inspired you to make those pairings.
Well, I had been thinking about writing about the one-child policy and adoption from China for something like 20 years. And I didn't have my way in. And I know we'll be talking more about this tonight. So I'll save how that actually came to be. But that idea, just what you were saying of how things travel and how they set down roots, and you know what becomes home. I was thinking about all of those things. And I did forget one other thing that I had wanted to mention before, which had to do with the leaf. And I don't know if we need to go back to Jessica for another recipe, but just remind me to talk about the pu'er leaf.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Jessica, I know you have 2 other really wonderful recipes. Do you want to start on the duck? Is it duck or chicken?
I wish it was duck. It's not duck. It's just a chicken. Oh, I'm still muted.
No, you're good.
No, I'm good. Okay, I'm good. Okay, so tea smoked chicken. But I have a question for you, Lisa. So somebody asked the question of a caffeine-free tea. And so then the first thing that comes to mind is chrysanthemum. Is chrysanthemum actually considered a tea, or is it considered a flower? What's the difference between?
Like a tisane. You know, there
Yeah.
are those teas that really are herbal teas that don't have caffeine in them. But you know, one of the things about pu'er, but also any caffeinated tea is, and you did this, you know, when you poured off that first pour, that actually takes away a lot of the caffeine. It actually washes it away. Now, typically, you know, when you use a tea bag, you only use it once. So you're getting the full amount of caffeine. But in this traditional way where you're warming the leaves, you're warming the cups and everything, you're getting rid of that first wash, that really heavy caffeine wash. And then the other thing about pu'er specifically is while it does have caffeine, just like every tea, the amount of phenols, which are very calming, sort of push down that caffeine feeling. So all tea has phenols. And so, you know, if you think about tea, oh, you could drink it in the morning to get you going, right? But you also can drink it when something terrible has happened, you know, sit down, calm down, everything's going to be here, relax. So it has those calming properties. And so with pu'er, the calming properties actually really override the caffeine properties.
Oh, that's cool. Huh. So tea, this is smoking with tea is something that I grew up, I didn't do it in Taiwan, but I did learn how to do it, just teaching at home chefs how to cook. And so I thought it'd be fun to show people how to make a smoker at home and use tea leaves to smoke. So this chicken that I bought, first of all, this is a pretty small chicken. It's not organic, but it is small. So when I talk about steaming chickens and things like that, under 4 pounds. It's hard to find, I understand, but if you can, try to find somebody that's under 4 pounds. And this guy, I marinated and I steamed. Now, you can stick a chopstick in the thickest part of the chicken, so the thigh area, and if you press on it and it leaks juice that's not bloody, your chicken is done. You don't even need to put a thermometer into it. So that's how you tell. So I steamed it for about 45 minutes, and then I'm gonna make a glaze that's going to go on top of it. And the glaze is just going to be a little bit of soy sauce, oyster sauce, and honey. And I'm going to brush it right on top. I'm going to try to. Hold on. I'm going to mix it all together. I already made it ahead of time so everyone can see what it looks like. But do this, try to do this in an open room that has good ventilation, because you're going to smoke it and you're going to burn some leaves. So I've got this mixture now. I'm going to just put it all over. So I'm going to coat my chicken with this mixture. The oyster sauce just helps it stick on. If you have just sweet soy sauce, that would work too, like the Thai sweet soy. I did stuff the cavity with a little bit of scallions too. So I have a big pot. You can use a big pot or you can use a wok. It's up to you what you want to use, but you want something that has a nice seal to it. Now we're going to protect your pan too. So you're going to coat the bottom with foil. On this foil, you're going to do a combination of rice. It can be any rice. I had jasmine, so I use jasmine. It doesn't really give any flavor. It slows down the burning process is what it's doing. Brown sugar, which speeds up the smoking process, and then your tea leaves. And so I'm going to mix that all together and get it on the stove. And you're going to burn it. So this is where I end up, you want to do this outside if you can. This is not fun to do indoors, and you want to seal it completely. So I have more foil, or if you have a towel, you can make sure, but you want to make sure that none of that smoke is going to come out from the side. What I'm doing right now is I'm heating this up, and you'll start seeing smoke wisp up, I think. Yes, you see it. Okay, perfect. So once you see that, you can transfer your chicken on top of there. And then quickly put a lid on it because you want to keep all that smoke inside. Okay. We're going to smoke it for about 10 to 12 minutes. The longer you let it sit there smoking, the smokier it will taste. But you're going to take it out. And then after you take it out, you will have this wonderful smoked tea chicken. And it turns this nice brown color from the tea leaves, the brown sugar, and that little bit of rice. If you're interested in the skin, so a lot of people will ask me, how do those Chinese restaurants get the Peking duck skin or the chicken skin so thin and crispy and so forth? When you marinate it overnight, you can't cover it. You need to let it expose itself and it'll dry out that skin then. That's why when you go into a Chinese restaurant that serves Peking duck, they're always hanging and they're drying then. And so it's the same idea. If you really want that like thin skin on this, you can dry it overnight, put the seasoning on it, but don't cover it and just let that cold air kind of dry out that skin. But then you've got your chicken ready to go. I put a little bit of sesame oil and you can go ahead and chop it up and serve it the way that you like. And that's it.
That looks so good.
I know. Can we come over?
Yeah, I know.
I want to come over right now. It looks delicious and so pretty.
We have a series of questions about pu'er tea. So maybe I will just read them and then Lisa and Jessica, you can think about how you want to respond. And Lisa, I'd love to hear more about pu'er leaves as well. So the first question, are there other teas that require a bloom phase or is it just with pu'er tea?
What phase? I'm sorry, a what phase?
A bloom phase. Bloom? The second question is there a consensus on how pu'er tea is aged? Do environmental factors affect how people age the tea? Humidity, dry environment?
Okay, we got to stop because it's
okay.
too many.
Yes.
So yeah, the environment has a huge effect on how the tea ages and also how it tastes. So I get a lot of my tea from Bana Tea Company. It's Linda Louie. She's in Los Angeles, and her sister still lives in, I think it's Hong Kong. And so Linda will sometimes buy the same tea cakes, and age half of them there and half of them here. So, you know, Southern California, hot and dry. Hong Kong, hot and very, very, very humid. And that tea ages, I mean, they both age, but they age differently and they age at different rates. And then the other thing is that it does pick up the flavors that are around it. So you wouldn't want to, for example, put your tea in a humidifier where there were cigars, because it's going to end up tasting like cigars. But this is part of why, when I mentioned earlier, people would go to restaurants, not for necessarily for the dim sum, but for the taste of the pu'er. That's because every restaurant was storing different stuff in their basements. You know, sometimes they had big things of ginger, or they had, you know, whatever it was down there was also going in and having an influence and an impact on the flavor of the tea. So that's one thing. And then the other, of course, is just the environment. So if you think of tea like wine, and when you know, people talk about wine when they're tasting it, they talk about the terroir, they talk about the year, they talk about, you know, the province that it grew in, whether it was Napa, whether it was Burgundy, because the soil, the amount of sunlight, the amount of rain, all have an effect for each year on each batch of tea. So people who are, you know, serious collectors, they pay a lot of attention to that. But, you know, we're now in this time period of global warming. Tufts University has had an ongoing multi-year, multidisciplinary project where they're working with farmers in the tea mountains of Yunnan to see what the effect of global warming or global climate change is having on these trees, on the medicinal qualities of pu'er, on the flavor profile of pu'er, because, you know, as it becomes hotter and drier, this is having an effect on the actual trees themselves.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Do you want to talk about the leaves?
Yeah, I did. So you saw Jessica earlier when she was breaking open the cake. And one of the things that's so different about pu'er, and you sometimes find this with other teas, like sometimes Iron Goddess of Mercy. I'm actually drinking some jasmine tea, which again was just regular tea if somebody wants to know how actual jasmine tea is made, but this is just a very small leaf. But one of the, you know, tiny. But one of the things about pu'er is that they're using the full leaf. This isn't like with Lipton tea where you have a, you know, or a tea bag. I don't mean to trash Lipton tea, but you know, a tea bag, it's just chopped up leaf. It's what they call the dregs. And so these are whole leaves. And every time you pour, you know, new water in your kaiwan or your teapot, it's actually opening up a different part of the leaf. So even though you might, you know, that, you know, if you use whatever 6 ounces of tea in here, and then you kept pouring new water on new infusions, maybe up to 15 different times, it's actually opening up a different part of the leaf, which means it has a different taste, and it hits different taste buds in your mouth, whether it's in the front, whether it's in the back, on the sides. And so it's constantly changing. And again, that's one of the reasons why, you know, people like this so much, because it's not just about that first cup. It's about what happens as you keep pouring the water on and how that leaf opens up.
That is so fascinating. And I'm just in awe of your ability to keep all this information in your head for a project that you've done several years ago.
So here's the thing, I was always a tea drinker, but this book turned me into a total tea snob. It's true. So.
Jessica, would you like to show us your last recipe?
Yes, and this is, well, so this is pretty much, I needed to make a dessert of some sort. And so I decided that we're gonna make shortbread, because you get Earl tea shortbread. You can do the exact same thing with pretty much any tea. And so I have flour, and if people haven't made shortbread before, it's gotta be the easiest baked good you can make because it doesn't take many ingredients. Flour, sugar, your tea leaves chopped up, you can put it in the food processor if you want, and then butter. A lot of butter, I understand. That's why a shortbread is so good. There's no leavening agent, there's no eggs in there. And I just wanted to show you that if you don't have a food processor, which is the easiest way to make it, use a grater. It's the same thing you can do with pie dough. If you grate butter, it'll stay cold, whole, and you can get it to do what you want it to do then. And then you don't need a food processor. You're not getting things dirty other than your grater. And you're not touching it too much then. You don't want to skimp out on the sugar for this that much, just because it's not that much anyways. But if you wanted to do this by hand, it's very easily done. All right, so I've got my grated butter ready to go. I'm going to put it right into my mixture. And then I'm just going to use my hands and gently break up that butter and coat it with the flour mixture. What that does is it helps it bind and evenly spread it out, so I'm not left with lumps. And that's all it is. And then I'm just going to go in and mix it up. And it'll take some time. But then you're going to press it into a container. And you'll be tempted to add liquid. Don't. Do not add any liquid. Don't add any fat. As the warmth of your hand melts that butter down, you'll notice it'll start clumping together. And that's all. So once it gets to like a crumbly pie texture, you can press it into a container. So you can press it into a pie plate, or you can do individual ones as well. So then go in and push down. And it's really pretty, the speckles in it from the tea. And then before you bake it, prick it really well, and it's 325 degrees for about 40 minutes. And then you've got this beautiful shortbread that comes out. I used a disposable, but you've got this beautiful shortbread that you can have with your tea then. And I made it the same size as the pu'er tea cake, just to have fun. But there you are. Hopefully you guys will make these things.
That's so beautiful. Jessica, I've never thought about grating butter before. That's a great technique. During this pandemic, my older son, every day he asks us what we're going to have for dinner. So I'm just going to replicate your entire recipe.
I have to teach tonight, so that's what everyone at home is having for dinner too, chicken.
I know there's several questions about pu'er still, but I did want to just read one more passage of Lisa's work. And this is from the novel China Doll. And it's about a trio of young Asian American women who aspire to be dancers, entertainers, especially in the interwar period. And they relocate themselves to San Francisco Bay Area in order to seek opportunities there. I wanted to read just the opening, partly because I used to live in Ohio, so this really resonated for me. This chapter is called Grace, a Measly Girl. I traveled west along on the cheapest bus routes I could find. Every mile took me farther from Plain City, Ohio, where I had been a fly speck on the wallpaper of a small town life. Each new state I passed through loosened another rope around my heart, my legs, my arms, yet my whole body ached and I couldn't shirk my vertigo. I lived on aspirin, crackers, and soda pop. I cried and cried and cried. On the 8th day, California. Many hours after crossing the boundary, I got off the bus and pulled my sweater a little more tightly around me. I expected sun and warmth, but on that October afternoon, fog hung over San Francisco, damp and shockingly cold. Lisa, in many of your works, women really take front and center as you're both protagonists and as well as antagonists, and that you really show us their strengths and weaknesses and their hopes and their flaws. And so I was wondering if you wanted to say a little bit more about why it's so important for you to center women.
Well, I am a woman. I do write about women. Most of my readers are women, but obviously it goes beyond that. So, if you actually sort of think about the history of Western literature, what we think of as the canon that's taught in universities, there are a few women writers. There's Jane Austen, there are the Bronte sisters, there's Emily Dickinson, George Eliot, but they're very few and far between. And it's not until you get to Virginia Woolf about 100 years ago that, she's so successful. And that actually there starts to be more women writers who are being published. And so today, you have many, many more women writers. If you look at the bestseller list, you'll see that men still dominate that list. I can tell you that men still are paid far more than women writers. And yet 80% of all books are bought by women. So to me, to tell these stories about women, to write about women's relationships is really important. I sort of think sometimes of the great classics like, Anna Karenina. How would Anna Karenina be different if it had been written by a woman? So this whole idea that you've had centuries and centuries of men writing women's, about women, Romeo and Juliet, just the Taming of the Shrew, how might a woman have written that story differently? So I think about that a lot, and that there are so many women's stories, stories that have been lost, forgotten, deliberately covered up, but also the strength that women have. And I think that we're seeing that right now, during the pandemic, where, women are working, but they're also they're trying to help their kids learn virtually. And I don't know about the people who are watching, but I I can tell you who does the grocery shopping in my house, and it's not my husband. So, I mean, I feel like I've been the one who's been going out, you know, with my mask and risking my life. So, you know, if you think about societies and cultures across the millennia, it's women who really are keeping the home, the family, culture, society moving forward. And then, of course, at the heart of that is food. You know, it's not just about making it and making sure that everybody eats, but it's how you get it and bring it back in. So this is really important to me. And I would add to that the idea of female friendship, which I've written about quite a bit. Certainly the one in China Dolls that you just mentioned. But that this is a unique relationship that we have in our lives, that we will tell a friend something that we wouldn't tell our mother or our husband or our boyfriend or our lover or our children. It's a very unique kind of intimacy. And of course, anytime you are opening up your heart, you are also opening up yourself to be hurt. You're quite vulnerable.
That's really beautiful. I know we're getting close to the end. So I want to ask Jessica if there's anything that you want to share with us. And then I have one more question I want to ask Lisa as well.
Nope, I just hope everybody can try these recipes out. They're actually really easy. And let me know how it goes. And shoot me an email if you ever have any questions about how to cook anything.
Jessica,
Well,
there was
I
a question. Oh, please go
I
ahead.
have a question. Do you have a preference of tea to use in the shortbread? You could use any kind, but do you have a preference?
I really do like, I've tried jasmine and I like jasmine. I'm a jasmine drinker. I have my jasmine tea in my flask right now. So I swear that's probably why I don't sleep at night. So I'm a jasmine lover. Jasmine ice cream is one of my favorite ice creams. I've had it before. And so jasmine is my go-to.
That's great. Jasmine, Jessica. Jessica, there
And
was
also jasmine shortbread sounds so delicious. That
It
sounds really, you know, that incredible aromatic aspect of jasmine that other teas don't necessarily have.
Jessica, there was a question about whether you can show the bottom of the steamer. I think there was interest in what that looked like. Is that something you can show us?
So I will show you, but I might set off the fire alarm. So if I set off the fire alarm, we're not signing back. Everyone's evacuating. But ready? Okay, because it's going to be smoky when I open it. Ready?
This will be a royal send-off.
Yes, ready? 1, 2, woo! That's what it looks like. Can you see what it looks like? So
Can you tilt it a little bit? Oh, very interesting. Thank you.
So that's what it looks like.
Lisa, I have two questions. One's like a public interest announcement. I think a lot of people were interested in where you got your pu'er and if you can maybe spell that source. And then the other question I have is, you had started talking about this, the impact of COVID-19, the pandemic on you, especially given the hostility that's been directed towards Chinese, Asian American people as a result of the political rhetoric around the virus.
Yeah, so I get most of my tea from Bana, B-A-N-A tea company. It's in Los Angeles. I actually have a link on my website, but you know, you can just type it in and it'll pop up. Another tea company that I really like a lot is called Denong, D-E-N-O-N-G. She is the largest importer of pu'er into the United States. She's got some beautiful, beautiful teas. And she actually has a tea shop, traditional Chinese tea shop in Pasadena. So I don't know if it's open now during the pandemic, but you know, I think things were getting closer and closer to things opening up. And that's, you know, for all of you down there in Orange County, it could be a really great excursion. And then as far as the pandemic, this has been a big challenge for me. I mean, a year ago at this time, I was out on book tour for the Island of Sea Women. I was supposed to be out for 6 weeks. I went to 5 states in 5 days, and then the tour was canceled. And so, you know, this has happened to writers all across the country. All of our tours have been canceled, but it turns out you can do fabulous events like this without having to go anywhere, which is kind of fun. But it is a challenge for me as I look forward to the next book. I thought I knew what it was going to be. I've been collecting material for a couple of years, but that trip was the research trip was going to require a pretty tough, hard, arduous trip deep into a remote area of China. And there's just no way I can do that right now. So the new book I'm working on is something that I can do from this room, but it is another historic novel that is about this is based on a true story, a woman who was a doctor in China in the 1400s, and which was not terribly unique. There were a lot of women doctors, but she did write the first book of its kind, man or woman, of her medical cases, which is published in 1510. And so she was really just a remarkable and inspiring woman. And then your last question had to do with,
I think the kind of anti-Asian hostility that has been generated by COVID-19.
Right. So this is, of course, there's no way to, I don't have a less blunt way to put this, but that this came from the highest level, where we had a president who was calling it the China virus. And, this attacking Chinese in particular at this level is something that has been here practically since the first Chinese arrived in the United States. And it was one of those things that was used in the lead up to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. This was the act that really, for a long time, barred it, or set out to bar the immigration of all Chinese immigrants to the United States. And as this was working its way through Congress, first, it was the first time that issues around immigration were ever used in a presidential election, and Rutherford Hayes won. And then Garfield carried this, again, anti-immigration, specifically anti-Chinese immigration, through to the passage of the Exclusion Act. And that language that was used then was stuff, they bring disease, they eat weird stuff, they're going to pollute our race. These are still the kinds of things that are said today. And I think what's happened over the last year is that it's tapped into this really ugly but covered up part that a lot of people have, where they don't even necessarily know where it comes from. They just know that it's like as soon as they heard that China virus, it triggered something. And of course, we are seeing terrible acts of violence and other things that are happening right now, particularly here in California and also in New York State. And I think this is a time, I actually just yesterday, I gave a talk to teachers in Texas. And, these issues around immigration, around racism and bigotry, they don't go away. They pop up at different times, and sometimes they can surprise us, how they can come up almost out of nowhere. Sometimes you can see it kind of bubbling along. But when you could look back and see what the roots of it are, and I do think that helps people to see, oh, this isn't something that's new. This is something that people have used this rhetoric for 150 years. And sadly, I think they'll be using, whether it's against the Chinese or some other group, we will see this kind of language and these kinds of acts happening going forward as well. But the only way to really get around it is through education, I believe.
Thank you so much, Lisa. You're so generous with your knowledge and your time. Thank you so much, Jessica, for showing us these really wonderful recipes. For people who want more, Lisa is going to be joining us today at 5 o'clock. And again, please join us for Asian Tea Week. Our last event is tomorrow at noon. Have a great day, everybody. And thank you so much, Lisa and Jessica.